It has been almost 46 years since my son Stephen Patrick passed away. I, however, talk to him on a regular basis and ask for his help. I have the sketch of him that my daughter Karen drew hanging on my living room wall. I will try to describe the key things I remember about his life, although it was a long time ago. His birth was the first time I was in the delivery room for any of my children, and I started to realize very quickly, because of all the activity, that there was a problem. I was asked to leave the delivery room by the doctors so they could concentrate on attending to Stephen's needs. It was decided that they would transfer Stephen from South Shore Hospital to St. Margaret's Hospital in Dorchester, but they were going to have him baptized first. So they wanted to know what we were going to name him. His mother chose Stephen Patrick, and I quickly agreed. Thinking back now, it was a very appropriate name. It is very strong sounding and was suitable for a little guy who was going to put on a fight for his life over the next 2 years. When we got to St. Margaret's, the prognosis was not too encouraging. He was in an incubator, and they felt his lungs were not completely developed, so they were using a CPAP machine to help him breathe. They referred to the problem as hyaline membrane disease, which John Kennedy's first child had died from. Stephen would be doing good, and then they would try to wean him off the CPAP machine, and he would have trouble breathing. This was when one of the young intern doctors came up with the theory that Stephen's trachea had not developed correctly, and that he had a condition known as floppy trachea. He brought his observation up to the chief of pediatrics, who was Joseph Kennedy, and after examination, he agreed with the intern's diagnosis. It was an interesting coincidence, since Dr. Joseph Kennedy was also the doctor who was involved with my sister Kathy O'Neill's first baby, Sean. He was born prematurely and had passed away. Dr. Joseph Kennedy suggested to us that Stephen be transferred to Boston Floating Hospital, where a doctor known as Dr. Leap had excellent results in treating this condition. Things progressed at Floating Hospital, and Dr. Leap performed a tracheotomy and inserted a tracheal tube into Stephen's trachea. Stephen was eventually able to start breathing on his own, but he stayed in the hospital, usually in the pediatric intensive care unit, for a number of months. We felt he was making steady progress, but slow progress, and the nurses took excellent care of him. He was constantly being evaluated by different doctors, because Floating Hospital was a teaching hospital, and Stephen was a very unique case. I remember one evaluation by a neurologist, which turned out to be very traumatic. The doctor said he would talk to us about the results of his evaluation when we came in to visit. We did not think it was going to be any big deal, so Jean went in to see him by herself. He proceeded to tell Jean that Stephen was going to be retarded, blind, and not able to hear. Needless to say, Jean and I were devastated by the news. After the fact, when Jean was talking to the nurses who were taking care of Stephen, they did not agree with his evaluation. They said Stephen was following shiny objects, seemed to respond to various sounds, recognized people and responded to them when he saw them. When we later consulted his primary doctor, Dr. Leap, he also disputed the neurologist's evaluation and said that the neurologist did not have sufficient pediatric experience to provide an accurate evaluation of Stephen's condition. As it turned out, almost all the bad things he had said about Stephen's development turned out not to be true. His nurse's evaluation proved to be correct. Eventually, Stephen progressed to the point that doctors and nurses felt he could go home if his mother felt that she could take care of his needs at home. Jean agreed, and she stayed in the floating hospital for I think a week, learning to take care of him. And eventually she became so skilled at this that any time there was a problem with Stephen, the doctors would seek out her advice before making a diagnosis. While she was staying overnight, she was staying in a ward where they were treating leukemia patients. And the children would be screaming and running away from the nurses because of the pain involved in their chemotherapy treatment. This made staying there very hard, and Jean had a lot of trouble sleeping there. We took Stephen home, and there were a couple of trips back to Floating Hospital because of seizures or bronchocols, which would turn into pneumonia. There were gland problems which persisted, particularly in the pituitary gland, which Stephen took a shot for daily. He fit in quite nicely at the house with the two other children. His older brother John really looked after him. His sister Karen was a little too young to be able to look after him, but she really loved him being home. One humorous experience happened, which was not humorous at the time. His cousin Mike Foley, who had muscular dystrophy, was over for a visit. They were both in the same playpen, and Michael ended up biting Stephen on the finger. This upset Stephen so much that he stopped breathing for a while. After both children were attended to and Mike reprimanded, things returned to normal. He really seemed to thrive at home, and his mother provided him with constant and excellent care. I was a backup, but I was a poor substitute, and I did the best I could at the time. Once I remember one of his emergency nurses from Floating Hospital came over to watch him so that Jeannie and I could go out together. We were just starting to get used to him being home when one day he started to go into convulsions. We had to get a police ambulance to get him to the hospital. I think the ambulance took him to South Shore Hospital where they tried to stabilize him. They decided to send him to Floating Hospital. Jean and I went to Floating Hospital where we waited in the intensive care waiting room for word on his condition. This was a room we had waited in so many times before. Finally, they came to tell us there was really no hope for him surviving. They asked if we wanted to take him off life support, and we both agreed that that was the right thing to do. They let us go in to see him one more time, and that was it. We had a one-day wake at Dolan's funeral home in Milton, Mass. We had a funeral mass for him at St. Anne's Church in Marshfield over the protest of another Catholic church in Marshfield, Assumption Church, which was our home parish. Jean's sister Judy delivered the eulogy, which is contained on this video. He is buried in a small, pretty cemetery called Cedar Grove. It is in the center of Marshfield. He rests under some shady trees, and the grave has a stone marker with the image of an angel. This image reminds me of my son Stephen Patrick, our little angel. In January of 1989, Stephen Patrick's sister Karen drew a sketch from one of his photographs in memory of her little brother. A copy of that sketch is also contained on this video, and the original copy of that sketch is framed and hanging on my living room wall. First picture, November 2nd, 1974. 2 days old at St. Margaret's Hospital. Pictures 2 to 6, January 10th, 1975. 9 weeks old at Floating Hospital. Jean and I had to wear gowns when holding Stephen. Picture 7, April 1975. 5.5 months old, a week before he came home for the first time. One of the ICU nurses is holding Stephen. Picture 8, February 1976. 15 months old, one of his many winter vacations at floating. Pictures at the bottom of the crib are a real challenge for Stephen. Stephen's christening at St. Anne's Church in Marshfield. The pastor presided. My sister Kathy O'Neill and her husband John acting as godparents. My sister Ginny holding Stephen after the christening. Stephen's first birthday. It's Stephen's first birthday. Oh joy, we have him home. And we'll carry out tradition, a cake of his very own. But a little son suspicious, and though John and Karen sing, he still don't try the pleasures eating by mouth can bring. So take the cake and dry his eyes, and bring his toys, that's better. And let him smile on a special day. He'll eat by mouth sometime later. Stephen's not happy with the cake since he can't eat by mouth yet. Stephen's toys are much more interesting to him. Christmas. See what hearty, noisy glee our little ones tonight. Dance around our Christmas tree with pretty toys that delight. Dearest one voice they say not hear, one face they may not see, are what of all the Christmas cheer to you and me. Cometh before our misty eyes the other little face, and we will clasp in tender, reverent wise that love in old embrace. Dearest the Christ child walks tonight, bringing his peace to men, and he bringeth to you and me the light of those past years again. Bringeth the peace of long ago, when a wee one clasped your knee, in list of the morrow, the dear one you know, and now come back is he. Dearest is often hard to say, that all is the best, for sometimes in a grievous way God's will is manifest. But in the grace of this holy night that brings us back our child, let us see the ways of God aright, and so be reconciled. Our gift to you this Christmas. Our gift to you this Christmas is a book of treasures and love. We had a lot of fear and sadness in these past 2 years, but so much joy that the bad times are overshadowed. Stephen fought 22 months to stay with us. There's no asking why he died. When he did, perhaps his mission on earth was finished. Whatever God's plan was for Stephen, be it that he touched so many people in a special way, medicine advanced a tiny step forward, or that he lived long enough to prove that even with many problems, he could develop into an adult who would earn a living for himself. We are thankful he allowed Stephen to be our son, even for such a short time. He's watching over all of us now with a special love, and waiting with the trumpet in hand for the day we will meet with joy again. Jack and Jean, December 25th, 1976. Stephen was all decked out in his Santa's Claus pajamas, hat and all, but the hat did not stay on his head for very long. Stephen is in his high chair pulling and ripping the wrapping paper like any other young child. Stephen sticks one of his Christmas presents in his mouth to chew on, typical for a 1-year-old. Stephen is put on the floor to play with his merry-go-round. Grandma's Prayer. I pray that risen from the dead, I may in glory stand, a crown perhaps upon my head, but a needle in my hand. I've never learned to sing or play, so let no harp be mine. From birth until my dying day, plain sewing's been my line. Therefore accustomed to the end, to plying useful stitches, I'll be content if asked to mend the little angel's breeches. Stephen's maternal grandmother, Alice Murphy, enjoying her newest grandson. You're not a dream. You're not a dream, you're a child. You're not a man, I'm not a queen. I'm a woman, take my hand. We'll make a place in this life that we planned, and here I'll stay until it's time for you to go. Yes, we're different worlds apart, we're not the same. We laughed and played at the start as in a game. You could have stayed outside my heart, but in you came. And here I'll stay until it's time for you to go. Don't ask why of me, don't ask how, don't ask forever, just love me now. This love of mine has no beginning, it has no end. I was an oak, now I'm a willow, now I can bend. And though I'll never in my life see you again, still I'll stay until it's time for you to go. Stephen's brother John Bowes is trying to calm his baby brother Stephen down after Stephen's cousin Mike had bit him on his finger. Stephen was so upset he stopped breathing for a while. First to go. I loved him so, his voice had grown into my heart, and now to hear that pretty song he had sung so long die on lips to me so dear. He's a child with golden hair, and heart is pure as snow. I knelt there and made this prayer, God, let me be the first to go. How often I recall it now, my darling tossing in his bed, I sitting there in mute despair, smoothing his curls upon his head. They did not speak that night of death, a feeling here had told me so. What could I say or do but pray that I might be the first to go? Yet thinking all of them standing there out yonder as the years go by, waiting for me to come, I see 'twas better you should wait and not I. For when I walk the vale of death upon the whale of Jordan's flow, shall rise a song that shall make me strong, the call of the child that was first to go. Stephen Patrick Bowes Eulogy, presented by Judy Weston, September 25th, 1976. We have come today as family and friends in memory of Stephen Patrick Bowes. Should come not in sadness or mourning, but treasure of the memories of Stephen we each hold dear to us. In 2 years, Stephen Patrick Bowes will touch the hearts and the lives of more people than you or I will in a lifetime. He was an example of strength and courage to all of us. And each of you has told the story of Stephen's fight for life to others. Countless numbers of people have been inspired by knowing this child. Who among us expects to fulfill so much before we go? Our hearts reach out to Stephen's family. Their loss was great. His mother was by his side, giving him strength, giving him courage, giving him love. His father shared a special bond with Stephen that cannot be explained in words. His brother and sister loved him. They did not understand why he has gone. These have been hard years, years of sorrow and heartbreak, years when a man's faith in God is tested. But they have not been empty years. The sorrow was softened by the joy. The heartbreak is eased by love, and faith was restored by the courage of a child. I don't regret 1 minute in the past 2 years. I'm a better person for knowing Stephen. These were the words of his father shortly after Stephen's death. Stephen Bowes is gone, but he felt he left us a legacy. We're all better people, richer people for knowing and loving him. Thank you, God, for sharing Stephen with us. We thank you for 2 years of happiness. We thank you for a lifetime of memories. This is the picture that my daughter Karen used to draw her sketch from. This is Karen's finished sketch of Stephen, which hangs on my wall. I count my treasures over with care, the little toy my darling knew, the little sock of faded hue, the little lock of golden hair. Stephen is resting next to another little angel called Jonathan, who died 2 years after Stephen.